Hello, welcome back to the channel. You're about to receive a very powerful, potent channel teaching on surrender. Surrender is such a vague topic. It's hard to know sometimes when you're actually doing it, what that feels like, and how to deepen into it. But when you are able to do this, oof, what can come through can be quite beautiful. So if you are in a season of surrender, allow this teaching, this channel teaching from the Akashic Records to support you on your path. Enjoy. I think that there can be a misconception with surrender sometimes that it's like waving the white flag in defeat. When we get to a place of surrender, sometimes it does feel like that. Let's be honest. Sometimes it does feel like, okay, I'm on like the battlefield and I'm like, save me. You know, because there is an aspect of the ego fighting in the process of surrender. Because often what is being asked in that experience of whatever you are being asked to surrender, and you will have many of these, as I have, well, maybe not if maybe not if you're lucky, but I have had many of these. And what I found is, in the process of what is being surrendered is often an aspect of ourselves that's no longer working. Maybe a belief, a way of seeing the world, or a big way of how you thought the world was or your relationship was, or, often there's some sort of there can be a constructed idea or belief that's like crumbling, or way of seeing yourself, or way of showing up in your life. Like something is crumbling, wanting to crumble. And part of what can make surrender feel so difficult. Well, that's cool. I can see a black hawk flying like right over. Ooh, we should look up the spiritual symbolism. Part of what can make surrender feel so difficult is because your ego fights you, wanting to keep everything the same. Because whatever is changing has in some way felt safe. There's been comfort there, familiarity there. Even if it doesn't feel good, there's familiarity. But what I've really come to understand about surrender is it's not a passive state. Okay. And we can hear this sometimes in the spiritual community, like, or especially too, and this isn't to knock anything to do with religion. I think that religion can be really beautiful for people in their lives. But I have gotten very curious around, um, Christianity, for example, has become very popular lately. Again, I'm not knocking anybody, but I always get curious with why is something popular? Why is something trending? Okay. And Jesus is trending right now. Our boy Yeshua is trending. Okay. And I've gotten curious with this, what's there? And I've talked to a lot of people in my life who are religious, especially Christians. And something I hear a lot is give it to God. Give it to God. Okay, I agree with that. There are some things that we give to God, the universe, spirit, whatever you want to call it. Okay. I refer to God a lot. My my relationship with God might look different than what someone else thinks God is. Okay. But when I say God, I'm talking about this higher intelligence, this higher power. But I've gotten curious with this. Okay, so give it to God. But what I've learned about this beautiful journey is that we're not just supposed to give everything up. There is this reciprocal relationship that we have on this journey Reciprocal being, and this is where surrender can be easier to understand, figuring out what we can control and what we can't. And to me, intuitively, the things we can't control, that's what we give to God. The things we can control, ourselves, our beliefs, our thoughts, our actions, our behaviors, our energy, our boundaries, all of that is a you, is a me, is an I thing. We don't give that to God. And that's where sometimes I struggle because I struggle with religion because I think that there can be this idea of like, well, God's got all of it. Yeah, okay, the universe, higher power, like there is something bigger that's holding all of this. But in my intuitive opinion and experience, our souls came here to have a human experience. And part of that is moving through our shit, is doing our inner work, is shifting our patterns. That's the stuff that we can control. And so I bring it back to this piece. Surrender is being able to figure out, like one big aspect of surrender is figuring out what can I control and what can't I. The stuff we can't, we give, we release, we let go. And we're going to talk about release and let go. But what we can control, our own inner work, how we respond to the pieces that show up, the thoughts we choose to believe, the emotions we choose to process, the space we choose to clear within ourselves, the actions we take. Like these are all things we can control. So surrender is not a passive state. It's a reciprocal exchange, a reciprocal process. And when we really begin to embody this, surrender actually gets to be a very empowering process. Easy? No. I don't know if we ever get to a place of surrender feeling easy. But the more that we explore it, get curious with it, get comfortable with it, the better we get at seeing when we're being asked to surrender and therefore don't fight it as much or for as long. And we get to feel more empowered in that process. And surrender, I think, is always showing up in the collective, but a lot more recently. Because also it's making me think of the fire horse energy. Like the energy this year is so big and we've already felt it, just the how much more intense it feels. But what I have found is that, an intense piece shows up, but it doesn't like last as long, or I don't fight it as long, and this is where I think surrender is so important, because when there is big, intense energy, the sooner we can see when it's showing up and trust to be able to ride that wave or ride that energy, the more efficiently, the more in flow we're going to feel through no matter what is intense. That's why I think surrender is such an important piece right now. Is it's actually a part of the recipe of this fire horse energy, is being able to surrender more to the really big things that are showing up that are in some ways out of our control. And as I say that, like, get curious with, what does that feel like when I say something's out of your control? Do you notice anything show up in the body? Do you notice the mind start to fight that? A constriction, or maybe you just push it away because you don't want to think about it. These are all ways that we respond to something feeling too much or not in alignment. And so I always just say, get curious, right? Because the ego wants to control everything. And that's part of the fight. The truth is, we can't. And so, using your discernment of what you can and what you can't control in your life is so important. And on this topic of discernment, what I just said there, knowing what you can and can't control, choosing what you want to take in and hold, that's a big part. Choosing what you want to take in and allow. Also, awareness of what is yours to hold and what is not. I think sometimes we can get onto this path where we start to do this work and we feel like we have to hold all of it. Well, that's not true. And that's actually exhausting. And so, what does it mean to let go and release control? Because we hear about this a lot. Release control, release control. I mean, even saying that probably brings something up in the nervous system because it doesn't feel safe to release control. It doesn't feel safe often just to let it go. But again, like being able to actively practice awareness of what you're holding on to that you shouldn't be or that you can't is so important. One, it's a big practice for your energy, right? Because when you're really aware of like what you're holding on to that you shouldn't be or that you can't, and then you're consistently practicing finding a way to release that, you're going to notice so much more of your energy come back online. A lot of the time, we're holding on to way too many things, and not always physically, emotionally, energetically, mentally. I mean, the other thing is when we're holding on to things so tightly as well, this is exhausting. And you probably know that feeling when you reflect moments in your life where you've held on to something thinking like it has to be this, it has to be this. And then maybe when you were able to release it, it either cleared space for what was actually supposed to come through or for that piece to shift. And so also noticing when you do have that feeling of needing to hold on, needing, right? Needing is the ego. If there's like an urge there or a fear there of letting go of that piece, you want to get curious there. What part is showing up here? And so, on the topic of letting go, how do we do this? How do we do this? Well, your best friend in this process is going to be your awareness of your nervous system. Because when we are in a regulated state, that is a natural letting go, right? When you are here, grounded, baseline, there's a safety in your system that naturally allows you to let go. It's the exhale, right? And you will notice that, right? Like if you take a moment and just think about those moments that you have where you're like, damn, I was so regulated there. You know that feeling. It's like you're here or you're here or you're here. But there is a natural exhale to the system. And so when we're learning how to let go, if you're figuring out, a place in your life right now where you're holding on so tightly, you're scared to let go, or you're trying to control, I would say first and foremost, regulate your nervous system. Do something that's going to help you regulate, and then look at that piece. Because when we are in fight, flight, or freeze, fawn, we're not clear. We're not thinking, feeling, embodying clarity, right? We talked about this intuition in our last module. And so regulating the nervous system allows you a better opportunity for being grounded, rooted, and clear and having access to greater potentials. There'll be so many times where I'm just like freaking out inside of myself. And I'm like, just go for a run. Just go for a run. Just go for a run. And I fight it, fight it, fight it, fight it. And then I go for the run. And guess how I feel after? Great, clear, grounded, tapped in. Because I cleared the energy, I regulated my system. And so that's first and foremost the number one piece. Right. And so it's really important that we can never force ourselves to let go. Right. If you sit and you go within yourself and you're like, I'm going to let go of this piece, I'm going to let go of this piece, you know what's going to happen is there's going to be more fight and more resistance. Because you need to remember that is a part or maybe many parts of you that are showing up that don't feel safe. So, how do you work with those parts? You get curious, you see what's there, you regulate the nervous system, you support your system to create safety and trust. And then what happens is a natural exhale. You know, letting go, in my opinion, is also not a passive state. There is a pre-process to letting go, and that is getting ourselves in a state to feel safe to let go. First and foremost, before I leave the questions, it's important to understand that most likely the thing that you're being asked to let go of or surrender to is probably not working anymore. Doesn't mean it never was. But where you are now, remember that we're always expanding and growing and shifting and changing. That's part of this. That's, if we look at the natural seasons of life and the physical world, like that's just life and death, rebirth and death cycles, right? And so, whatever that piece is, maybe it's ready to be let go of completely. Maybe it's ready to shift, but you're being asked to surrender in some way here. Okay. And perhaps what you're being asked to let go of is something that the universe, spirit, God wants to be holding and handling. So you could think about that. Is this something that I'm not even supposed to be holding or trying to control or manage? And maybe what it is that I'm trying to control and manage and hold on to so tightly was never mine to try to hold. Maybe part of this is the universe asking you to be more reciprocal in the trust. So, some questions to ponder. Where in your life are you being asked to release more control? What could be wanting to come through in that space where you're gripping so tightly? But I look back over the last 8 years, when Max is around 2, that's really when my journey began to take off or descend, I should say. Didn't go somewhere like an airplane. I really had to go within. But I look back on those 8 years and those moments where I have felt the deepest invitation of surrender have been the most clarifying, expansive experiences for me. And I couldn't have seen it while I was in it. We often can't. That's the point of the trust piece. I look at my mental health rock bottom as a new mom. And what came from that was this opening into my spiritual connection and trust. I was a teacher for 10 plus years. And I got to a place on my journey where I was asked to release my contract internally. I was asked to release my contract to build my business. I had to trust in that, even though there was no certainty in the same way the salary is, right? Going on antidepressants, it went against everything. My ego was like, well, this is not who we are. This is not what we stand for. This is gonna, all the stories. But I knew that there was something there. And in the process of going on them, it allowed me to find a baseline to learn somatic work. Right. And I've since come off of them, but that was a massive leap. Trust fall, right? The surrender, there's a trust fall element. Separating from my marriage, which then led me on this deep path into exploring like who am I actually in my relationship patterns and my and abuse that I experienced when I was younger, like such big pieces that have been so healing for me. The truth is that in our surrender moments, the harder it feels, the bigger the expansion is going to be. So if anything, trust that. Use that as an anchor if you're in it or the next time you're in it. Because what is being asked of you, like really get curious with what am I scared of here? What am I scared of? That's probably going to be where your expansion is. Where have you been forced to surrender on your path, to release control, to let it all go? Perhaps now or a time in the past that you can think of. In doing this, what occurred thereafter? So it could be helpful for you to think about something that you have gone through in the past, because then this will help you reinforce those new beliefs of like, there's something on the other side of this for me. How do I know? Because I've been through surrender before. And what was on the other side of that? Right? How was that initiation of surrender preparing you for something bigger and greater?